This thesis is not to argue that those who believe in the theory of the age of accountability necessarily support abortion, but rather this thesis is as follows. If the age of accountability is real, then abortion may be morally justified on its basis. The age of accountability is a theological concept that exists not for the sake of malicious intent, but rather as a way to comfort those who experience the death of young children. The idea is that before a certain age, children are unable to comprehend the depth of their sin, so until that age is reached, God does not hold them accountable for it for the sake of their ignorance. The intended comfort of this doctrine is for those who have children who die while still young, unsure whether or not these children are saved. After all, any moral society will treasure children and not desire to see them come to harm, whether or not their own fault. Because it is clear in Scripture that God cares about and values children greatly, therefore, it is argued that he makes special exception for their sin and does not hold them accountable where he would otherwise hold an adult accountable for the same action. This is not to argue that children are incapable of sin, but rather that the sin that they are capable of, they aren't culpable for. On the surface, this seems like a beautiful and loving theological principle that extols God's care for the smallest and most vulnerable. One major problem is, however, that this concept is entirely unbiblical. There is nowhere in Scripture that prescribes or describes a specific doctrine that there is an age before which a person is not responsible for their sin. To the contrary, there are verses such as Psalm 51:5 which state that even at the time of conception, a person is guilty of sin. The psalmist writes this, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." So, without any prescription or example in the Bible to be based on, and with Scripture to the contrary, this should not be a Christian belief. Another error with this belief is that it presupposes that we know better than God how to address sin and protect children. This belief assumes that God had a massive oversight in how he punishes sin, something that has to be rectified by invented theological theories, perfecting the heretofore imperfect law, justice, and mercy of God. Instead, as Christians, we should trust both that God is telling the truth in Scripture when he explains the law and its consequences, and that he knows best how to deal with each and every situation. No matter what theology we might invent, God is already aware of the situation and is applying the ideal solution, whether or not he fully reveals it to us. The third and perhaps most troubling issue with this theory is that the theory of the age of accountability may be used to justify abortion. Consider that once a person is grown, they may or may not believe, and thereby may or may not be saved. If, on the other hand, a child is automatically saved and has no condition under which they may be damned until they reach a certain age, then it might be argued that the best thing to do for their sake is to prevent progress to that state. Briefly, if a child is automatically saved, no matter any other condition, so long as they die before reaching the aforementioned age, then it is best that they do die. Since abortion is the intentional ending of a child's life, it can therefore be argued that abortion is also the guarantor of salvation. Thusly, according to the age of accountability, a child is saved not principally by the death of Christ and the forgiveness of sins, but by his own death and inability to reach the maturity to sin. Were this a true teaching, this would be a rational telos. However, it is not, so it isn't. I rest my case.